There is something almost mystical that happens when you go to see a movie that really works. It could be a comedy, a romance, an adventure. It takes you into a different world and you experience things you could never experience in your daily life. Here's how David Lynch described it.
Cinema is its own language, and with it you can say so many things because you've got time and sequences, you've got dialogue, you've got music, you've got sound effects, you have so many tools, and so you can express a feeling and a thought that can't be conveyed any other way. It's a magical medium. For me, it's so beautiful to think about these pictures and sounds flowing together in time and in sequence, making something that can be done only through cinema. It's not just words or music, it's a whole range of elements coming together and making something that didn't exist before. It's telling stories. It's devising a world, an experience that people cannot have unless they see that film. The world in the film is a created one, and people sometimes love going into that world. For them, that world is real. And if people find out certain things about how something was done, or how this means this or this means that, the next time they see the film, these things enter into the experience, and then the film becomes different. I think it's so precious and important to maintain that world and not say certain things that could break the experience.
So there you have it. David Lynch, great filmmaker, is very specific. There are secrets we should not reveal because it would break the audience's mystical experience. In other words, what David Lynch is saying is,
Oh, pay no attention to that man behind the curtain. The great and past has spoken.
my name's Alex Nibley, and I'm going to do exactly what David Lynch said we shouldn't do, which is to reveal the secret magic principles of how movies make us have these mystical experiences. Because that's what film analysis is. And there's a certain irony in David Lynch saying that, because David Lynch was very well aware of how film analysis got started and what it is. This is how it happened. František Daniel, better known as Frank, was a Czech filmmaker. And I think it's safe to say he was the greatest film educator ever. He was the founding dean of the Czech Film Academy in Prague, founding dean of the American Film Institute, creator of the graduate screenwriting program at Columbia University, along with his former student Milos Forman, founding artistic director of the Sundance Institute, and dean of the College of Cinematic Arts at the University of Southern California, the biggest film school in the world. So, along with that very impressive resume, Frank was a brilliant film theorist. But he was different from most film theorists in one important way. Everything Frank taught was absolutely practical. It wasn't abstract theoretical concepts about the social impact of film, and it had nothing to do with film criticism. It was completely focused on the craft of how you make an audience have a great experience in the theater. Everything he taught, writers could take straight to the keyboard. Directors could use it on the set. Editors could follow his principles to cut together great stories. So, back to the story of how film analysis got started. Frank had been trained in Moscow at the oldest film school in the world, a place where they invented a lot of the techniques that define cinema and are used even today. And his PhD course of study was aesthetic philosophy, which explores how communication happens, how we as human beings experience beauty, how we absorb stories, and how art makes an impact on us. And he had gone very deep into that through the Russian traditional approach. And that's the way he taught at the Czech Film Academy in Prague. Well, in 1968, when the Russians invaded Czechoslovakia, Frank escaped with his family and came to the United States, where he had been offered a position as the first dean of a new film school in Los Angeles called the American Film Institute, or AFI. So at AFI, Frank got up and began lecturing on aesthetic philosophy, the way he taught in Czechoslovakia and the way he'd been taught in Moscow. Well, this was a classroom full of young 1960s Americans, and they just glazed over. It was not the way they were used to learning. And Frank could see it just wasn't going to work. So he said, well, let's try something different. Let's just take a film and watch it, and we'll take it apart and see what all the moving parts are. So they all decided together that they would watch the film Stagecoach because it was pretty basic, and they all knew the film. And they figured that would be a good one to explore. So they put up Stagecoach, and they rolled the projector, and Frank stopped at the end of the first sequence. And he said, how many setups were there? Well, I don't know. I wasn't counting setups. So they rewound the film, started the movie again, and they figured out how many setups there were in the first sequence. Then they showed the first sequence again, and Frank stopped the film, and he said, when was the first use of music, and how was the music used? Well, they started doing that, and they went back through the movie and took it apart piece by piece to discover all those hidden techniques, the ones that David Lynch said that we shouldn't reveal. Here's the ironic thing. Sitting in that classroom when Frank started doing film analysis and exposing all the secrets of cinematic storytelling, you guessed it, David Lynch was there. He was in that first class at AFI, and that was where Frank helped him get Eraserhead made, which launched his filmmaking career. So David Lynch was very familiar with the process of revealing these secrets. But I don't disagree with him. We don't want to share all these secrets with everybody. We don't want to reveal our magic to the world. As filmmakers, we want to keep these secrets to ourselves so we can use them. The purpose of film analysis is to train you to stop viewing movies as a consumer and start viewing them through professional eyes, where you can look at a film and say, okay, they made me laugh, they made me cry, and now I can see what they did to make that happen. There's something I can steal. There's something I can copy. That's a principle I can use, and it'll be different in my movie, but it's something that can help me tell my story. Think of it as if you were going to medical school to be a doctor. The foundational classes you would take would be anatomy and physiology. These are the basics of how a human body works. And in an anatomy class, you would cut open a body, a cadaver, and examine all the parts and how they fit together and what they do. That's what we do in film analysis. We open up the film and dissect it to see how it works. I first met Frank Daniel at the Sundance Institute, where I was an intern back in the early 1980s when Sundance was first starting. And then I studied with Frank again 10 years later for the last 2 years of his life. What I learned was that a filmmaker has to do two things. The first is to understand the fundamental principles of cinematic communication, the principles that were created and refined by the great masters of cinema in the past. The second thing is to take these principles and apply them in your own unique way as an expression of your individual vision. Without learning from the masters who went before, you're fumbling around, constantly reinventing the reel. But if you don't bring something personal to the film, then you're just regurgitating and reprocessing what we've already seen. Film analysis is not a set of recipes. It's not formulas that dictate how you make your movies. It's not rules so much as patterns that show how great filmmakers in the past have made a powerful impact. What Frank Daniel taught was the tools. Once you have access to the toolbox, then you are free to follow your imagination wherever it leads. So film analysis is focused on uncovering the underlying principles that will always be useful for any filmmaker in any genre, in any time period or culture. It's based on what's inherent in the human psychology of how we absorb stories. Now, one thing film analysis is not is criticism. I don't do reviews. I don't do critiques. The difference is that we're not here to judge the films. We're just here to understand how they do what they do. If we use the same medical analogy that I was using before, a doctor who treats a patient in a clinic doesn't have to decide whether it's a nice guy or a jerk. They just try to make a correct diagnosis no matter who has the disease. All over the internet, you'll find lots and lots of people making ranked lists of movies and ranting about how their favorite film got robbed at the Oscars, or how this sequel is so much better than that sequel, and which movies are great and which movies are garbage. Hey, movies are one subject where everyone in the world is an expert, right? Look, enjoying a movie is not a crime. Hating a movie is not a crime. And I will never try to tell somebody that they were wrong to enjoy a film that they saw. Also, I will never try to talk someone into liking a film just because I liked it. As a film analyst, I'm interested in two things. What impact did the film make on the audience it was intended for? And what techniques did the filmmakers use to make that impact? They made you laugh, they made you cry. How did they do that? Now, I'm not opposed to film criticism if it's quality criticism. It can be very important in opening up audiences to unknown filmmakers and helping them see things in new lights, really building the industry. And there have been some great film critics who've had an important impact on the industry. But the majority of the critics on the internet do not fit that category. And it's something very different from what we do in film analysis. As professionals, you have to exercise a certain discipline in watching films. You need, first of all, to give the film real attention. If possible, watch the film in a theater with an audience. It makes a huge difference to feel the energy of an audience reacting to the film. If you can't see it in a theater, watch on the best video system possible with the best audio. Don't try to watch Lawrence of Arabia on your phone. You have not experienced Lawrence of Arabia. The next step is to watch the analysis videos where I dissect the films in real time, stopping, starting, examining all the storytelling techniques. One of the things that you'll see is that very different films are using the same techniques to have an impact on the audience. Movies from different genres, different countries, different cultures and time periods. So people ask me, how do I choose which films I'm going to analyze? First of all, I'm open to suggestions. Please let me know if there's a particular film you want to see analyzed, and also let me know what is it about that film, what impact did it have that you want to pick apart and see how it worked. But here's what I look for. Does the film clearly demonstrate strong cinematic communication principles? I want movies you can learn from. I tend to steer clear of films that are very recent because I don't want to be seen as a film critic. So I usually don't analyze films that are less than a few years old. I try to get films from a lot of different time periods, a lot of different countries, different genres and directors. But they are all films that have strong lessons for us as filmmakers and clearly illustrate cinematic communication principles. I want you to be able to see how very different movies use the same principles and techniques to tell strong stories. The other thing I try to do is to introduce people to movies that maybe they haven't seen before. That should give you kind of an idea what film analysis is and how this podcast will work. So, what do you say? Should we pull back the green curtain? See what that squirrely guy back there is doing to your brain?